Every GTA player has had this argument. Which car actually defines the series? Someone says the Infernus. Someone says the Deluxo. And somebody always says the whole thing died the day Rockstar put homing missiles on a flying bike. Here's the part nobody wants to admit. GTA's cars aren't just rides. They're a timeline of what the series believes about itself. And that belief has been quietly falling apart for a decade. Grand Theft Auto 3 started it in 2001, and it didn't have much to work with. 66 vehicles total, low poly, no motorcycles, no aircraft, no customization of any kind. But it planted the flagship that everything else would be measured against. The Infernus showed up here first, a wedge-shaped two-seater, clearly borrowing its silhouette from the Lamborghini Countach, and it instantly became the car every player wanted parked outside their hideout. Even though it wasn't actually the fastest thing in the game. The Banshee arrived alongside it, styled after a Dodge Viper, all long hood and aggressive stance, built to look like it was doing 90 while parked. The Stinger was there too, sharing its lines with a Ferrari Daytona Spider, a design the series would keep returning to for the next 2 decades, and the Stallion rounded things out as the game's clear nod to a classic Ford Mustang. Boxy and loud in a way that made it an instant favorite for players who wanted muscle over finesse. The Sentinel, a boxy sedan borrowing from a BMW E30, became the mafia car of choice, so common in cutscenes that players started associating it with organized crime before they'd even read a mission briefing. Even the Rhino tank, absurd as it sounds next to a lineup of sports cars, mattered here, because it told players from day one that this world had no upper limit on what you could eventually get your hands on. Between all of them, GTA 3 made its first real statement. This is what winning looks like in Liberty City. It wasn't about lap times, and there weren't even proper street races to test that theory yet. It was about what you were telling other players the moment they saw you behind the wheel. Everything the series built afterward is a variation on that one idea. Then came Vice City in 2002, and this is where the series actually found its personality. The vehicle count nearly doubled to 109, and motorcycles and helicopters entered the franchise for the very first time. The Infernus returned, this time unmistakably a Countach clone, and it became Lance Vance's signature ride, the white supercar that tells you more about a character in 3 seconds than a page of dialogue ever could. But the real star of the show was the Cheetah, styled after the mid-1980s Ferrari Testarossa, all sharp creases and side strakes, and it's arguably the single most photographed car in GTA history, showing up in nearly every loading screen and promotional shot from that entire era. Then there's the Stinger again, now paired with the Comet, a Porsche-styled two-seater more common in the wealthy districts than the streets, and the Banshee, faster and better looking than it had any right to be for an early 2000s game. Don't forget the Stretch either, a comically long white limousine that's slow, wide, and nearly impossible to park anywhere useful, included purely because excess itself was part of the vibe Rockstar was chasing. On 2 wheels, the PCJ 600, modeled after a Suzuki GSX sport bike, became the default getaway vehicle for anyone who'd rather split lanes than sit in traffic. And the Sabre took its cues from a Pontiac GTO, another muscle car nod to keep the American side of the roster from feeling thin next to all the Italian sports cars. The Sand King, an oversized pickup borrowing from the boxy off-roaders of the era, gave players their first real taste of driving something built to survive a crash rather than avoid one. Even the Hunter attack helicopter and the humble PCJ delivery scooter belonged to the same world-building project. Because Vice City wasn't just adding vehicles, it was building out an entire economic ecosystem where a pizza boy on a scooter and a drug baron and a cheetah could plausibly exist on the same block. Vice City understood something the first game never got around to. Cars aren't transport, they're costume. A player driving a cheetah down Ocean Drive is telling you exactly who they think they are. And Rockstar knew it well enough to build an entire soundtrack and art style around that same fantasy. San Andreas 2004 took the opposite approach entirely. Instead of one glamorous city, it handed players a whole state, 3 cities and open countryside stretched between them, and the car list exploded to match that scale. This is where the NRG 500 became the bike everyone wanted. Modeled on the real Honda NSR 500, a Grand Prix racing bike from the 1980s and 90s, and in-game it topped out around 118 miles an hour, making it the fastest thing on two wheels in the entire game. The Bullet arrived with two-tone paint splitting the body down the middle, a clear homage to the Ford GT40's classic racing livery, and it paired serious top speed with handling, sharp enough to make it a favorite for cross-country runs between San Fierro and Las Venturas. The Hot Knife showed up too, a late 1920s hot rod built off a Ford Model A, one of the oldest-looking vehicles ever added to the series, and proof Rockstar wanted the car list to cover decades, not just one flashy decade. The Super GT, borrowing its shape from a Mitsubishi 3000 GT, gave players a genuinely fast option that didn't scream for attention the way the Cheetah did, and the Slam van leaned hard into custom lowrider culture, a nod to San Andreas's deep obsession with the state's real car scene, alongside the Savannah and the Voodoo, both built around the hydraulic-heavy lowrider tradition that let players bounce their cars for cash in side missions nobody outside the fandom even remembers exists. Then there's the Hot Ring Racer, styled after American stock cars and restricted to only a couple of spawn locations in the entire game, which turns simply owning one into a status symbol among players who knew exactly where to look. Add the BF400 dirt bike, borrowing from a Honda XR400, and off-road terrain finally had a vehicle built specifically for it, instead of players just wrestling a road bike through the mud. San Andreas's lesson was scale. More roads, more terrain, and more room for an actual car culture to breathe, instead of just existing as background scenery in one city. Grand Theft Auto 4, released in 2008, did something almost nobody talks about when they rank these games. It slowed everything down on purpose. Rockstar rebuilt the physics engine from the ground up using the Euphoria engine, and cars suddenly had real weight, body roll under braking, and damage deformation that actually changed how they handled after a crash, instead of just looking scratched up. The exaggerated arcade feel of San Andreas disappeared almost overnight. The Comet, GTA 4's answer to the Cheetah, was now shaped after a Porsche 911, and for the first time, it felt like there was real mass behind the wheel, instead of a weightless toy sliding across the map on invisible rails. The Sabre Turbo carried the muscle car torch this time, heavily inspired by the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS, a real machine that packed up to 450 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque from its 7.4-liter V8, good for a 0 to 60 run, around 6 seconds, and a top speed near 140 miles an hour. The Turismo picked up where the Infernus left off, still Lamborghini-flavored but reworked with the heavier, grippier feel the new engine demanded, and the Cognoscenti, styled after a Bentley, gave the game's criminal underworld its first genuinely convincing luxury sedan. The Feltzer leaned on Mercedes' SLK styling for players who wanted something European and understated, while the Buffalo kept the Mustang-inspired muscle car lineage running for anyone who still wanted raw power over refinement. Even the taxis got the treatment, remodeled after real Ford Crown Victorias so closely that Liberty City's traffic finally looked like it belonged to a real, specific American city, instead of a generic stand-in for one. This wasn't the fantasy version of driving anymore. It was closer to what actually losing control at high speed on a real city street feels like, tires struggling for grip instead of magically finding it. And it's the entry that convinced a lot of skeptical players GTA could be taken seriously as a driving game, not just a driving toy that happened to have a story attached to it. Grand Theft Auto V 2013 is where the car list stopped being a list and turned into a full alternate car industry. Over 700 vehicles shipped with the game, built around fictional manufacturers standing in for real ones you'd recognize instantly. Grotti for Ferrari, still the best-looking and fastest badge in the game. Albany for Cadillac, all vintage American class, with the Roosevelt directly modeled on a 1930s Cadillac V16 town car. Obey for Audi, complete with a brand name that's a direct joke about Audi's reputation for famously obedient all-wheel drive handling, wrapped around a tailgater that's a dead ringer for an Audi A6. Coil for Tesla, years before most open-world games were even thinking seriously about electric cars, with the Raiden pulling its design straight from the Model S. Invetero's Coquette leaned on the Chevrolet Corvette C7, while the Weenie Easy borrowed its compact charm from the Mini Cooper, right down to the two-tone roof, and the Karin Futo copied a Toyota AE86 Levin closely enough, four-cylinder engine and rear-wheel drive included, that it became the game's default cheap drift car. The D-Class Vigero kept the Chevelle SS bloodline alive from the previous game. The Vapid Dominator leaned on Mustang styling for anyone chasing raw straight-line power, and the Ocelot-badged cars leaned into Jaguar styling for players who wanted understated wealth instead of a paint job that screamed for attention. Higher up the ladder, the Progen Entity XXR borrowed its lines from a Koenigsegg Agera R, and the Ubermacht Osiris blended cues from both a Pagani and a McLaren into something that still doesn't look quite like either. And then there's the Pegassi Zentorno, modeled after the Lamborghini Sesto Elemento, a real limited edition hypercar built almost entirely from carbon fiber, alongside the Truffade Adder, GTA's stand-in for the Bugatti Veyron, and the Vapid Ellie, a fairly direct homage to the Shelby GT500 Eleanor. Even the Z-Type, modeled on a Bugatti Type 57 SC Atlantic from the 1930s, showed Rockstar was still willing to reach back nearly a century for a vehicle if the silhouette was striking enough to earn a place in the game. GTA 5's roster wasn't just detailed for its own sake. It was a fully cross-referenced satire of the entire car industry, right down to the brand names. And that satire is a huge part of why the game still holds up more than a decade after release. GTA Online's early years leaned into that same satirical spirit before anything fundamentally changed. The armored Kuruma, based on the boxy silhouette of a Nissan Skyline, became the single most recommended purchase for new players because its bulletproof windows and reinforced body made contact missions and heist setups dramatically safer to run solo. The Duke O'Death, a nod to 70s American muscle with a Dodge Charger stance, became a free starter vehicle players actively fought over, not because it was fast, but because it looked like it belonged in a demolition derby, and nobody could resist that reputation. The Buzzard Attack Chopper, cheap by GTA Online standards and armed with miniguns and rockets, became the default way to cross the map for CEO and VIP work, hitting a recorded top speed north of 145 miles an hour in the air. The Insurgent, an armored military-style pickup, gave players their first real taste of a rolling fortress they could actually afford early on, long before the Terabyte turned into a mobile mission hub for entire crews. And the Deluxo showed up as a direct callback to the DeLorean from Back to the Future. And it can fly. That was pure fan service. The kind of wink Vice City would have approved of completely. Even the Vigilante, an armored sports car with unmistakable Batmobile styling, fit the same pattern, a reference wrapped around a genuinely usable vehicle, rather than a reference that replaced the vehicle entirely. None of these vehicles broke the game's internal logic. They were still cars first, with a joke or a reference bolted on second, the same rule that had held since 2001. Then came the oppressor MK2, and the logic finally broke. It launched at roughly $3.89 million in-game dollars, a weaponized hoverbike with homing missiles capable of around 130 miles an hour on the ground and matching that in the air, and its release single-handedly changed the game's entire ecosystem overnight, reportedly making several older vehicles functionally obsolete the moment it landed on Warstock cash and carry. It doesn't look like a car pretending to be a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. It looks like a weapon, because functionally, that's exactly what it is. And its release remains one of the most divisive moments in GTA Online's entire history, still being argued about in the community years after launch, with newer players routinely blindsided by a vehicle that turns free mode into a one-sided shooting gallery. The Pegassi Toreador followed not long after, missile-armed and fully submersible, recorded at a top speed above 135 miles an hour, taking its headlight design from the Aston Martin Lagonda and its body from the Lamborghini Marzal concept car. Players frequently say they prefer it specifically because it doesn't flag them as an obvious target on the minimap the way the oppressor does the instant somebody spots the icon on screen, and because a direct missile hit against its underside doesn't guarantee a kill the way it does against a hoverbike with no armor at all. The Night Shark, armored and machine gun resistant, joined the same arms race a little later, less flashy than either of them, but arguably more practical for players who just wanted to survive a lobby rather than dominate it, and priced low enough that it became a common first purchase for players tired of getting picked off before they'd even loaded into a mission. Somewhere between the Infernus in 2001 and the Oppressor MK2, GTA's cars stopped being about who you wanted to be seen as and started being about what you needed to survive a lobby full of strangers who all own the same missiles you do. A shift nobody voted for, but everybody eventually adapted to anyway. So, which era actually wins this argument? The 3D era gave GTA its visual language, the idea that a car is a character choice before it's anything else. The HD era gave that language weight and consequence, turning every crash into something you'd actually feel instead of just something you'd shrug off. And GTA Online gave it something the earlier single-player games never had to deal with: a live economy where cars are tools first and identity second, whether players wanted that trade-off or not. None of that makes today's GTA worse. It just means the fantasy quietly changed shape. While everyone was busy admiring the paint job on the way to the next heist, the Infernus never needed a missile lock to make a statement, and the Oppressor MK2 barely needs a paint job to make one, and that gap is really the whole story of where this franchise's car culture has been heading for 25 years. Next time you spawn into a lobby, take a second before you floor it, and ask yourself which era that car actually belongs to, and whether the game still lets you answer that question with anything other than a price tag and a missile lock. Argue it out below, Zentorno or Infernus, then subscribe for the next one.